G'day everyone, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to talk to you guys about how to release a tight sternocleidomastoid muscle, or SCM for short, but not only how to release it, but how to keep it loose forever. I want to talk about what you need to do to not have to stretch out or mobilize this muscle anymore. So we'll cover a good stretch to free it up quickly. We'll go through some of the underlying features that cause a tight SCM. So it's important to address those features if you want this muscle to stay away forever. So for anyone who doesn't know, basically the sternocleidomastoid muscle, it attaches from the base of the skull and wraps down and attaches to the front of the clavicle at the top. And it's responsible for sort of tilting your head and rotating it in a different direction. So if you have, excuse me, what's called a torticollis, which is like a contracture or some muscle spasm or some more long-term or more ingrained muscle tightness, you might find that that head is often tilting and rotating to one side. You might see someone in this position more often. So being able to release that tightness, but also get to the underlying cause of that tightness is really beneficial for a lot of people. So basically what we want to talk about when we're discussing the underlying cause of a tight sternocleidomastoid muscle, we actually need to go deeper than the muscle itself and talk about what's going on at the joints underneath that. So even though the muscle attaches to the base of the skull, it does cross over basically every single sort of cervical joint, every single neck joint on its path down to attach and anchor under the top of that chest. So if any of those joints, particularly the ones higher up, tend to get a little bit stiff, tight, or overloaded, you can ask that muscle to be tighter than it needs to help out. So again, if we're freeing up this muscle, which we'll get to in a second, but if we're not addressing the underlying joint stiffness underneath, then potentially we're going to have to keep trying to stretch that muscle out without seeing progress or a permanent change over time. So we want to make sure we get to that. And a really simple way to do that, and if you've been following the channel, you'll know this, you'll understand this pretty well by now, is a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball is a fantastic way to free up joint stiffness. I think there's a paraglider going overhead. You might be able to see it in the background. But what we want to basically do here is we want to take the ball and press it into some joints that you feel are stiff, tight, and tender potentially, and then just segmentally work your way down. And we'll go through this in a second. But the point I really need to make about this is that if you find a spot in your neck that feels really tender, if it's on the same side of that tightness, that probably tells us that that's the level that's important. But if it's really tender on one side, but then you go across to the exact same joints on the opposite side of that segment, and that feels a lot more restricted, then we actually need to spend more time on the restricted side as opposed to just looking for where it's tender. So again, to go over that again quickly, if your sternocleidomastoid muscle is tight on the right-hand side, and the joints underneath are tender, but they're not restricted and stiff when you dig a ball into, if it's the other side that's stiff, then that's the side that you need to work on, because it will make that tenderness decrease, and it will take away the need for that muscle to feel like it has to be tight over the top of that. So I'd say about 50% of people have their tightness and stiffness and tenderness on the same side, but just double check that you're not one of those other sort of 50% of people that has all their symptoms on one side, but where we need to work is actually on the other side. So again, if you haven't done this before, what I'll get you to do is we want to make sure that you test and retest your neck movement first. So however tight that feels through that SCM muscle to begin with, just do some basic neck movement exercises just to see how free or how stiff and tight your neck feels when you do this. Because we're going to do the exercise and then compare it again afterwards. So what we're going to do is we're going to place the ball not directly at the back of your neck, but just slightly off to the side at about a 45-degree angle. So if 90 degrees is directly on the side, we sort of want to split the difference and be in the middle on that corner. And what we basically want to do here is we want to lie down and we want to let the ball press into that side. So essentially what we need to do is, if you're looking straight up, you won't get it. But if you turn your head slightly to one side, you should feel like it hits that spot pretty quickly. And what we want to basically get you to do here is just stay there. So again, if this feels tender and restricted, then this is the side that you need to be on. But if it's the other side that feels restricted and tight, then you have to be on this side to do most of the work. But for the purposes of this video, let's assume it's on the same side. So I'm going to turn my head slightly to feel like I'm on the right spot. I'm just going to stay here for a few seconds. And then once I've done that, I want to take the ball and just segmentally work it down a little bit, up a little bit, and just keep looking for the areas that I feel are restricted and stiff, tight, and or tender, depending on where you are. And then what you should find is when you immediately reassess those movements, and even just doing that for a few seconds, it feels looser for me straight away. So make sure that you see a change when you do this, because it's going to guide where you need to put the ball, because if you put the ball in a particular spot and it doesn't feel like anything's different, then you probably haven't hit a spot that's relevant to that muscular tightness. But if you find a spot that feels really tight, really dense, the ball doesn't sink in very well, and then you spend a couple of minutes on that spot and it feels like it gives, if you then automatically feel like you're moving a lot better and then magically that muscle doesn't feel as restricted as it did before, then you know that you're on the right spot. You don't need anyone to tell you that. You can keep hunting for those spots. So again, we get a lot of questions asking how long to do that for. As I said before, you want to go hunting for what you feel, and if you find a really juicy spot, you could spend a couple of minutes there if you want to. You can spend 45 minutes, half an hour if you want to, just scouring up and down that neck, looking for those tight spots. You don't want to put the ball through the front of the neck, through that tight muscle. It's a little bit disadvantageous. We want to look for that stiffness and that restriction through the joints where possible. You only need to do it once a day. You can do it more than once a day if you feel up to it, but listen to how your body feels. Spend as much or as little time as you feel you need to make those range of motion changes. So again, if we're not addressing that underlying joint stiffness and that joint restriction, then we're not taking away that constant cueing for that muscle to be tight over the top. Because when we get to this sternocleidomastoid stretch, particularly if you have torticollis, this is a good one to do. We need to make sure that we're hitting that exact spot and taking away some of that overlying tightness. So again, if we're not stretching this muscle and releasing the deeper stiffness, we're going to have to keep doing this consistently, and we're not going to make that progress over time. So again, the easiest way to stretch this muscle is what I find is if your right side is tight, we want to do basically the opposite of what that muscle does. So we know that if the right hand muscle is functioning, it's going to tilt your head a little bit and it's going to rotate you away and flex you a little bit to that side, to the opposite side. So what we need to do is, if you have your finger on that muscle, if you just gently look up a little bit, then tilt your head away from that side and then rotate your head away from that side, you should feel like you get a nice stretch through that muscle in through this area that comes through here. So again, we know that it's when we look down, when we use this muscle, it looks down and it sort of pulls us around to the other side. We want to do the opposite of that. So looking up a little bit, tilting away a little bit, and then rotating away as well. You should find that you get an extra sort of tight pull through here. You can twist your head a little bit to that side just to see where the best version of your tightness is, but ultimately go hunting for that tightness. Now again, with traditional stretching, we've always found that position and held that position for about 30 seconds. That's not good enough in today's modern thinking. So what we need to do is we need to activate that muscle in a tight position to physically get our brain and nervous system involved to activate that tissue, and then when we relax that tissue, it will give and release. So it's far better than just holding that stretch. So again, how that looks is that we look up, we tilt away and rotate away in the area that you feel some tightness through that muscle. So for me, I can feel a little bit of tightness just here. I'll get you to place your hand on your sort of forehead or the side of your head. Once you've found that tightness that you're looking to reduce, then gently push back into your hand. So do the opposite movement, try and make that muscle do its job, and then release and come back up again. And then what you should find is it automatically feels a little bit looser. So for me, if I'm doing the other side, I'm going to twist away here, found a decent sort of tight spot through here. I'm going to place my hand above my head. So it's similar to the muscle energy technique we did in a few videos ago, but the idea is make sure that you are sort of pushing down a little bit at the same time with your head, so you're pushing into that hand, essentially going in the opposite direction to what you were just moving to find that tightness. So what you should find is as soon as you've done that, we want to hold that for about 5 to 10 seconds and then release, and then go further into the stretch than before. So I'm pushing back, feeling that muscle working through here, and I relax after 10 seconds. Then I should find that I can go a little bit further into that stretch than I could before, and then relax. And then again, what you should find is when you do that same test, retest before, and for me, it feels a lot freer straight away, you should feel like you've made some immediate changes in that tissue. So remember, you have to activate that tight muscle in the stretch position. You're gonna hold it for a couple of seconds, then release. You don't have to come out of the stretch, just stop activating it. And when you do stop activating it, you might find you can go a little bit further into that stretch than what you could before. So again, the key with this stretch, you don't have to worry too much about what position you have to have your head and neck in specifically. But if you look up and then twist away and look around, you should find that you can start to hit the spot that you need to hit that feels tight. And then if you tense up in that position, you'll always hit the right spot. So again, base it on how you feel. As soon as you feel the tightness that you're trying to free up, make sure that you tense that position, hold it for 10 seconds, relax, and just go further into the stretch as often as you feel like you're making change. And then as soon as you feel like you've stopped, we've had enough, then just recheck your movements again, and you should automatically feel like it's a little bit freer. So clinically, I find that's the fastest way to free up a restricted sternocleidomastoid muscle, particularly for torticollis, or at least trying to help those types of symptoms. You've got to get the ball underneath to free up those stiff joints, because often they're the cue or the signal for that muscle to be tight in the first place. So free up those tight spots. And then the third thing, is something we always go through on the channel here, is it's not good enough just to show you how to free up stiff structures. We also need to talk about why they're stiff in the first place. So if you know that upper neck segment that you found with the ball, if you found one of those segments is more stiff and tight than another, there has to be a very specific reason for why they become stiff and tight in the first place. So if we're not looking to figure out the shapes and the positions and the postures that you're getting into that have asked those tissues to be stiff, then again, you can de-stiffen those joints and free up that tight muscle as much as you want to, but it's going to habitually keep coming back consistently long term. But on the channel, we want to make sure that you have a clear path towards fixing your complaints. We can't have that conversation unless we're talking about your postural habits. So again, what we're looking for, if you found that there's a specific segment of your neck up the top of your neck that has become more stiff and tight than the rest, there has to be a reason why you're bringing that segment in, and often it reverts back to looking down. So if you start to lower your neck or lower your head to the point where you feel that segment kick in, so if you're up nice and tall, some ducks have joined the video. As you start to look down as far as you feel comfortable, you'll feel, if you have your finger in there, you'll feel a segment start to be included. And if that's your stiff, tight, tender segment, then the position that your head is in is probably one that you're going to be getting into a lot throughout the day. So that can be using your phone, that can be looking down at a computer or a laptop. It can be a number of different things. It can be sort of slouching and looking down at the same time. You'll see them swim past. But also we want to make sure that you're not missing where that is. So for most people, just to get a head start on this, most people's postural dysfunction relates to sitting. If it's not sitting, it's going to be something where you're looking down a lot. So if that's work related, if that's leisure related, if you play an instrument, if you like to use a laptop and a computer a lot, even if you just sit down and watch TV and browse your iPad, there has to be a shape that's asking those tissues to stiffen up over time. So again, we always want to hit those three sections. Make sure your postural awareness is good enough to get you out of those specific shapes, free up the underlying joint stiffness, and then free up that tight muscle over the top, which is often the easiest thing to do because most people tend to know about that. But a lot of people don't often follow it up with the joint stuff underneath and the postural stuff over the top of that together. So again, hopefully that was really helpful. If you did find that useful, if it's something that's new to you, if you've been struggling with this for a while and these ideas have helped you a lot, let me know in the comments down below. I always need that feedback to make sure that these videos are helpful. If you did find it helpful, please consider sharing it around, giving it a like, just so that I know and that everyone else knows that it's hopefully a good video. And then obviously subscribe to the channel if you're new, just so that you can get these types of videos as they come out on a weekly basis. So I appreciate you stopping by. The ducks have moved on, the paragliders moved on as well. I'm starting to hit some shade with the tree, but I'll talk to you guys next time, and I'll see you soon.